The weather-beaten trail wound ahead into the dust-racked climes of the barren land which dominates large portions of the Nargolian Empire. Age-worn hoofprints smothered by the shifting sands of time shone dully against the dust-splattered crust of earth. The tireless sun cast its parching rays of incandescence from overhead halfway through its daily revolution. Small rodents scampered about, occupying themselves in the daily accomplishments of their dismal lives. Dust sprayed over three heaving mounds in blinding clouds, while they bore the burdensome cargoes of their struggling overseers. Prepare to embrace your creators in the Stygian haunts of hell, barbarian, gasped the first soldier. Only after you have kissed the fleeting steed of death, wretch, returned Grignar. By the way, I realized I should probably say something about my hat. So, this is a hat that has a skeleton fairy on it, which was given me by a dear friend of mine who I used to work with at a used bookstore. And so, if you see this little dangling thing, that's what it is. It's a skeleton fairy. So, there we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel. It's so nice to be here this evening. I wanted to do a short video about this novella that I recently finished reading, The Eye of Argon. For those of you who don't know, this was basically My Immortal before My Immortal. My Immortal is, of course, legendary Harry Potter fanfic that is notorious for errors, spelling errors, inappropriate content, things that just don't make any sense at all. Sentence to sentence level writing that it would make a first grader blush. And this is basically a novelette that was written in the 1970s that was published in a small zine called uh, Ozfam in the 1970s. And then it got picked up as an example of really bad writing. Uh, and it wound up being passed around at fan conventions among SF authors, among other um, circles, and became kind of a contest that people would put on, that they would pick through the manuscript and they would sit around in a circle and they would read out loud from it until they could not handle it anymore and they would start laughing, at which point it would then be passed along to the next person. So it's sort of like popcorn reading. I don't know if any of you did that in school. Um, but what I find interesting about it is it's an example of a short story that is overloaded with cliches. It is overloaded with over the top descriptions, and I'll splice in reading from it later. It is trying to do too much in a way. Um, Reading it out loud, the descriptions hit a point where you really can't um, you really can't follow. Like, you will run out of breath as you're trying to read it out loud because it just goes on, and none of the language flows well together. This is from chapter 2. Arriving after dusk in Gorzum, Grignar descended down a dismal alley, reining his horse before a beaten tavern. The red-haired giant strode into the dimly lit hostelry, reeking of foul odors and cheap wine. The air was heavy with choking fumes spewing from the smoldering torches encased within the den's earthen-packed walls. Tables were clustered with groups of drunken thieves and cutthroats, tossing dice or making love to willing prostitutes. Eyeing a slender female crouched alone at a nearby bench, Grignar advanced, wishing to wholesomely occupy his time. The flickering torches cast weird shafts of luminescence dancing over the half naked harlot of his choice, her stringy clad her, her stringy orchid twines of hair swinging gracefully over the lithe, opaque nose as she raised a half drained mug to her pale red lips. Glancing upward, the alluring complexion noted the stalwart giant as he rapidly approached. A faint glimmer sparked from the pair of deep blue ovals of the amorous female as she motioned toward Grignar, enticing him to join her. The barbarian seated himself upon a stool at the wench's side, exposing his body naked save for a loincloth brandishing a long steel broadsword, an iron spiraled battle helmet, and a thick leather sandals to her unobstructed view. Thou hast need to occupy your time, barbarian, questioned the female. Only if something worth offering is within my reach, stated Grignar as his hands crept to embrace the tempting female, who welcomed them with open willingness. From where do you come, barbarian, and by what are you called? Gasped the complying wench as Gragnar smothered her lips with the blazing touch of his flaming mouth. So this story basically became the thing of legend for a while. And for many years, there was a question of who wrote this? Was this a real short story? Was this a put on? Was this something that a professional writer had done to make fun of fanzines and the quality of the writing in them? In the introduction, there's actually a story related by Michael Swanwick that he had had a conversation with Samuel Delany, where Delaney had said, in his sort of humorous way, that he and a group of his students had come together to try to create the worst short story that they possibly could. And that in doing so, they had each kind of contributed a paragraph to an unreasonable short story entitled The Eye of Argon. This turns out not to be true, which is unfortunate because I love the idea of Samuel Delany creating an intentionally bad short story. But um, it was just one of many different stories that had come around over the years, as people speculated on who was this Jim Theis who was behind it. And it turned out that Jim Theis was actually a real person. He was at the time a 16-year-old fan who had written this short story. It was his first published short story. And he was in the fan circuit, and he apparently continued going to the fan conventions and being involved in SF in various ways up until the time that he died in the early 2000s. In the introduction, it's adapted from a short essay that Lee Weinstein had published in the New York Review of Science Fiction. Um, he tracks down uh, Jim's information and finds out that he had passed. And he speculates at one point about why it was that he had never really stepped in and said, "Oh yeah, I'm the guy who wrote this." Um, I'm not really convinced. I'm not really certain why. I'm not really certain why there's a mystery when it comes to that. Um, to me, if you're seeing that your work is being continually mocked at a convention, like, and one hopes that these things were done kind of in a spirit of fun, but I get the feeling that there were some people who were definitely not doing it in a spirit of fun, that they were doing it in a spirit of just total mockery. um, those it's hard to imagine a situation where a person would come forward and own up to something that they did. I can tell you that there are short stories that I wrote last year that I wouldn't want people realizing because they don't work, you know. So I would be terrified to look and see suddenly if something I wrote when I was 16 turned up. But what I find really interesting about the Eye of Aragon is it's a look at a particular moment in SF writing, and it's a look at this sort of consciousness of a fan and this adolescent fantasy, and this weird space of not really having the tools to tell the story that you want to tell, but trying to go ahead for it anyway. And in a weird way, I do actually find that admirable. Um, do I think that it necessarily needed to be proto sporked into the ground? Probably not. However, I am very glad that we do have um, this, that we can pick it up, we can look at it, we can chuckle at it, we can remember our own failings and our own false starts as writers. And in a way, that's probably what I take away from it the most.